The focus of today's lesson is writers include in-text citations, giving credit to the author of a direct quote. And so we are using direct quotes in our essay, and the way you include an in-text citation is you have your direct quote, and you have quotation marks at the beginning of the direct quote and quotation marks at the end of the direct quote. And then you have your quotation marks at the beginning and end of each direct quote. Then what happens is you place, I'm going to move this. Then what happens is you place parentheses at the beginning and end of an in-text citation. And the in-text citation, writers include in-text citations when writing and writers include today's lesson. Writers include in-text citations, giving credit to the author of direct quotes. So we're currently working on an inform, explain essay. So when we include a direct quote in an inform, explain essay, we need to make sure that we include an in-text citation as well. However, if you're writing a literary essay and you quote the text directly, then you also have to include an in-text citation to give credit to the author. If you're writing an argument essay, same deal. You must include, with direct quotes, you must give credit to the author with an in-text citation. So here's how it works. Here's an example of the direct quote. So you have the direct quote, and you know it's a direct quote because there's quotes at the beginning and end of each direct quote. So that is been taken directly from the text. The words have not changed. It's exactly as you would find it in the text, and you put quotes at the beginning and the end. Then, following that direct quote, you place parentheses at the beginning and end of an in-text citation, and in this case, the in-text citation is the author's last name because we know the author's last name. That's not always the case, but right now we know the author's last name is Palmer, so we put the author's last name in the sandwiched between parentheses. And the punctuation goes after the in-text citation. I cannot stress that enough. The punctuation goes after the in-text citation. So we're going to go through a couple examples here. So when there is an author name, the in-text citation is the author's last name. So here's the works cited example, and the author is Trudy Palmer, and because we're using an extension for gathering our works cited list, I just pulled this from my works cited list. Trudy Palmer is the author, and Trudy Palmer wrote The Hues of Struggle for Equal Education. So now when it comes, if I'm going to directly quote something from this article that Trudy Palmer wrote, then again, I have my direct quote with quotation marks. I'm going too fast. I have my direct quote with quotation marks, and then in parentheses, immediately after the direct quote, I have the last name of the author in parentheses, and then a period at the end. Now, when there is not an author name, then the in-text citation is the title of the article, sandwiched between quotes. So here's my works cited example. The title of the article is Education as a Civil Right. And you'll notice the title of the article has quotes at the beginning and the end, and it's quote, Education as a Civil Right, period, quote. So I'm going to copy that exactly as it is when I use that in my essay as an in-text citation. So here's my direct quote. Of course, I have my quotes at the beginning and end of the direct quote. Then in parentheses, I copied exactly as it was, quote, education is a civil right, period, quote. So then I'm going to say, quote, education is a civil right, period, quote. And I have to make sure there's a period there. So I'm going to add that period. There we go. Education is a civil right, parentheses, quote, education is a civil right, period, quote. And then you have your parentheses and the period at the end of the sentence. So now we're going to try and see if we can determine correct in-text citations. So here we have our works cited. Sonia Benson is the author, and so Benson would be the last name of the author. So is number 1 right? We have a direct quote. We ended the direct quote, and now we have in parentheses Benson. Is example number 2 right? Where you have your direct quote, the end of the direct quote is here, parentheses Benson, parentheses, or is the third one correct? You have the end of your direct quote, parentheses Benson, parentheses, period. So of those 3, which one is correct? 1, 2, or 3? If you said number 3, you are exactly correct, because number 3 has the direct quote ends, immediately after is the parentheses, author last name, parentheses, and the period showing that's the end of the sentence. If you answered number 3, you were exactly correct. Okay, here's another quiz. This next one. This one, the works cited does not have an author name. It's the title of the article, Little Rock 9. And you'll notice it's quote, Little Rock 9, period, quote. So that is what I would use for my in-text citation. The quote, Little Rock 9, period, quote. That's the title of the article. So here we have to decide, is 1, 2, or 3 correct? So we have the end of the direct quote, and then we have parentheses, quote, Little Rock 9, period, quote, parentheses, period. Or is option 2 correct? We have the end of our quote, parentheses, quote, Little Rock 9, period, quote, parentheses, period. Or is number 3 correct? And number 3 is going to be a little hard to see. I'll try not to hover down there. Is number 3 correct? Punished, quote, parentheses, Little Rock 9, parentheses, period. Of those 3, which one is correct? If you chose number 2, you are correct, because it's the quote, the direct quote ends, there's quotation marks there, then you have parentheses, quote, Little Rock 9, period, quote, parentheses, and then you have your ending punctuation. And you might be wondering why number 2 is correct and not number 1. Well, number 1 has a period at the end of the direct quote, and that doesn't belong there. The period goes after the in-text citation. So number 2 is correct. Next. When there are 2 authors, the in-text citation is the last name of both authors. So here's the works cited. We have, this one is something written by Nancy Fry and Douglas Fisher. And so when I put my direct quote in there, of course, my direct quote has quotation marks at the beginning and the end, and then I would put parentheses, Fry and Fisher, because those are the last names, parentheses, and the period goes at the end. You might run into a scenario like this, where you have 3 or more authors. The in-text citation is the last name of the first author, followed by et al. The short phrase et al. Shows the reader there are 3 or more authors. So let me give you an example. So here's our work cited. So you have Sonia Benson was an author, Daniel Brannon Jr., and Rebecca Valentine. There's 3 authors. And so in order to directly quote something from their Titanic document, I have to make sure the direct quote's in quotation marks, and then I have parentheses, Benson et al., period, parenthesis, period. And that's because there are 3 or more authors. Et al. Shows the reader there are 3 or more authors. So to wrap things up, writers include in-text citations giving credit to the author of direct quotes. You have your direct quote. The quotes are at the beginning and end of each direct quote. You have your parentheses around the author's last name, and the punctuation is placed at the end of the sentence, immediately after the in-text citation.